Hello and welcome back to the Matchday Roundup. We are on episode 20 today, which is really exciting. We have two awesome games for you today. We have the Newcastle Jets versus Hills United, and we have Football St George versus the Western Sydney Wanderers. We have an online interview conducted with Matt Mallows, who you've heard his voice many a times at this point on the podcast. I got him on for an online interview purely because I wasn't able to play today. I picked up COVID, so that made things a little bit more difficult, but you work around it, I guess. And there's two more things I want to talk about quickly before we get into the episode itself. Firstly, please vote for the awards. They are open for one more week. The winners will be announced next Saturday, the 6th of July, so please get your votes in before then. And the last thing that I want to talk about before we get in is that this little podcast was recently discussed on another podcast I listened to. There is a podcast made by The Athletic called The Daily Football Briefing, and I sent in an email to them a couple of days ago at the time of recording and was like, hey guys, you really inspired me to make this podcast, and in the structure and format and stuff like that, I'm going to put the clip in of the host Ian McIntosh talking about this podcast after this, and then after that, we'll get into the show. So yeah.
Jackson Taylor writes in from Australia. Love the show, Ian. He says, so much that I've started my own show about power chair football here in Sydney, which follows a very similar format. It's good too. I had a listen. Big fan of the whistles to break things up. We should try that. If you like that sort of thing, search it out. It's called Powered by Football, and you'll find it on Spotify and Apple and all the other places.
Did I just put a plug for my own podcast within my podcast from another podcast? Podcastception. Onto the show. In the first match of the day, that is the Newcastle Jets versus Hills United in the reserve grade, there was good pressure from the Jets in the opening half, but they just weren't able to convert in the opening minutes. The same goes for the Hills. Whilst they did have some, good signs, neither side could convert. As halftime hit, it was 0-0 between the Newcastle Jets and Hills United. A free kick for the Newcastle Jets in the opening minutes of the second half saw Anlazar set up Nolan well, and the latter snuck the ball in from the free kick on the edge of the box to send Newcastle 1-0 up. Newcastle pressure continued in the second half. There was little Hills reply. Whilst the Hills would begin to apply pressure toward the end of the match, 2-on-1s would break down their attack. And at full time, Newcastle beat the Hills 1-0. In the Premier League match between the Newcastle Jets and Hills United, there was strong Newcastle chances in the opening minutes, but they couldn't be converted. There was a strong string of passes by Newcastle, which saw Second Crane link up well with the latter, sneaking the ball between Mallows and the goalpost. Just before the end of the first half, another strong string of passes saw Chris Hastis meet Jordan Crane well, the latter doubling Newcastle's lead. Whilst the Hills would begin to have promising chances upon the return of the match, they were not able to convert them. Whilst Newcastle would have their own promising chances as they sort of eased into the second half, they too would not be able to convert. As the full-time whistle blew, Newcastle beat the Hills 2-0.
Hello, my name is Matthew Mallows, and I'm here to be interviewed. Again.
You just can't get off the podcast, can you? You just keep coming
No,
back somehow.
I really can't.
You poor thing.
I'm like a bad smell. I just kind of hang around, just always here, always lingering.
Yeah, if you're always lingering, what am I? Because, if
you're like the pile of poo, right? I'm like the fly hanging around.
Quality football journalism brought to you by the Power
Indeed.
Football Podcast. Off to a good start.
all your power chair football needs.
That's it. Well, we have a very brief interview with you today, Matt. Firstly, you were just talking about the Premier League game. What are your sort of initial thoughts after that match?
I feel like we did pretty well. I'm a bit disappointed with the result. I thought that 2-0 was probably a fair reflection of the result overall, but I was a bit disappointed we couldn't at least keep it down to like one goal or maybe even get a 0-0 draw out of it. For the first 15 minutes, we defended pretty well. They didn't have a lot of scoring opportunities, and we just kind of clocked off in the last 5 minutes, and they scored 2 goals leading into half time. The second half was pretty even. I mean, we both had some good scoring opportunities, which was nice. I was glad to get out of our own half for a game against Jets for once. I was proud of the way we played, especially because we had Sam pull out late. So we had Lockie back up after a full game in Rezzies to play in goals. And we also had Prayag make his Premier League debut, and he did quite well in goals. I was pretty happy with the way the reserve graders stepped up and played.
Yeah, nice. You touched on it briefly in that response, but I thought I might get you to talk a bit more. How do you feel you sort of handled the pressure of Newcastle that they're so well known for?
I feel like we defended our set pieces very well. So they had set pieces, which we managed to contain pretty well for the most part. I think both their goals came from open play. So Jets' ability to pass is the best in the competition, and if you let them pass, they're eventually going to break you down. I felt like we did well in the first 10 or so minutes to limit their ability to pass, but we just kind of clocked off in the last 5, 10 minutes of the first half, and then second half we went back to what we were doing to start the first half and limited their passing as much as we could. Even managed to make a few quick breaks from intercepting their passing and blocking some stuff off. Especially in the second half, we generated a little bit of pressure of our own, but Jets just they're so well drilled in everything that they do. We couldn't wear them down the way that they weared us down in the first half.
Well, yeah, I guess that sort of pressure and that strength, as you said, is what won them the comp at the end of the day. And then another thing which, looking at sort of the, results around the sport going into the end, because there's 1 week left, it's kind of boring to make you make a prediction for the whole, yourself or the team. It's a bit boring. So I thought if you look at the table, the last game is second versus third in the Premier League, St George
Yeah.
versus your team, Hills United. So how
hmm
how are you feeling going into that? How confident are you to secure second?
I'd be lying if I said I wasn't nervous. St George are the only team that haven't beaten us this season. So there's that going for us. I reckon if we play like we did against Jets, we'll have a good chance. But Abs's unpredictability in the middle there, just he can pull gold out of nothing, basically, and he'll be very hard to shut down. So we'll have to try and limit what he's able to do with the football. In terms of finishing second, as long as we don't lose, we get second. Just muscling up in defense, making sure to limit their opportunities, and then when we get opportunities of our own, we really have to nail them, basically. I would be lying if I said I wasn't a little bit nervous about the weekend.
And how evident do you think your nerves are going to be when you play the game on Saturday?
We shall find out. I'm normally very nervous before games by default, whether that's the enormous amounts of caffeine I normally have before a game, because waking up in the mornings is something that my body does not enjoy doing, especially with those early games. I think the first 5 to 10 minutes will be crucial in determining how the match is going to go. We cannot afford to start the game asleep or fall complacent in defense in those first couple of minutes of the match, or else I think that'll set the tone. Whatever happens in the first 5, 10 minutes will set the tone for the rest of the game.
Can we get a score prediction from you two before we close this interview?
Score prediction? I don't know if I can predict it, but I'd say hopefully 1-0. Going off past results, I'd say we've both got a goal in us, so a fair prediction would probably be 1-1. Because I think both games have been 2-1 to us, so they've certainly got goals in them against us. But hopeful for a 1-0 or a 2-0 result, because I want to come second in clean sheets, and I think I need one more to do it. They're a very good team. So it's quite hard to predict any kind of result.
Is there anything else you'd like to add about the match or about last week's game or anything before we close?
Other than the fact that it's been a pretty good competition. I mean, apart from Jets being the outliner, I feel like it's been very close. Like anyone could beat anyone on their day. I think every team has taken points off every other team, with the exclusion of like no one's beaten Jets. The comp's been pretty close. There've been a lot of close games. the level of football definitely improved since the beginning of the season, with teams figuring out what worked for them and what didn't work. Quite a few teams made tactical adjustments, which was quite interesting to see. Different ways that people were adjusting their teams to play and counter certain things and whatnot. I am looking forward to the battle for first place in reserve grade on the weekend because I believe both those teams play. So I guess we'll have a champion by the end of the day, with a bit of luck.
Yeah, especially, in that time, I'll be there all day on podcast duties because the Wanderers are done with their season. So
Hmm.
it'll be a really interesting game, couple games to watch purely from a
It will be.
spectator perspective. So
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
thank you so much for being on yet again, Matt.
No worries. Always a pleasure to be on here.
Sorry that I keep roping you back.
Look, people just like hearing me speak. What can I say?
Yeah, you tell yourself that,
Uh,
bud.
someone's got to.
Moving on to the St George versus Western Sydney Wanderers reserve grade game. There was some strong passes from the Wanderers, but broke down due to contact. Both sides played with three players due to shortages. I myself being one of the player shortages, so that's one interesting thing to note. But there was a strong chance soon after this Wanderers chance broke down for St George. There was a three in the box infringement, and the chance repeated, but both times St George missed their chance to go ahead. There was strong chances for both sides within 30 seconds, but neither could convert. At half-time, St George tied the Western Sydney Wanderers 0-0. There was a strong set of passes between Albert and Vidakovic at the start of the second half, the latter just missing his shot grazing the goalpost. Good teamwork between those two sees Mitch Albert just graze the goalpost not long after, and they just were not able to score. And at full time, they would rue their missed chances as St George drew the Western Sydney Wanderers 0-0. Special shout out to Jonathan Reyes, played an absolutely amazing game. I wasn't there, so he took up a lot of the duties in the middle of the park and he did a really good job. Moving on to the Premier League game now, which he also played in. There was strong pressure from St George in the opening minutes, which the Wanderers dealt well with from St George. There was a good link up not long after between Steve Webb and Ben Keat, and the latter's shot went just wide. They just weren't able to score. There was a high ball in the box, which saw St George goalkeeper Jake Vidakovic make a strong headed save. Hope he's alright. I actually haven't spoken to him since that. Hope you're good, Jake. And then after that, there was some more passes from St George, really, really well done. And it saw by the end of it, Logan Balderson, reserve grade player, he assisted Mitch to send St George 1-0 up. So good on him for that. There's a corner for St George. We saw Abs set up Mitch Albert well. Albert sneaking the ball through the Wanderers' defence on the second attempt of the corner. And at halftime, St George were 2-0 up on the Wanderers. There was a corner for the Wanderers as soon as the match returned. And Steve Webb, forced an own goal from the St George defence, giving the Wanderers a bit of hope in the game. And whilst there was pressure from both sides, it was breaking down as the game progressed. There was strong pressure from St George, especially in the dying minutes, but they just could not convert. And as the full-time whistle blew, St George defeated the Wanderers 2-1. Moving on to the reserve grade table and statistics now. In first place is Football St George. They sit on 24 points with one game left to play. Newcastle Jets sit in second. They're on 22 points. They have one game left to play. The Western Sydney Wanderers, their season is over. They are locked into third. They're on 13 points. Sydney FC sit in fourth. They are on 9 points. And Hills United sit in last. They are on 7 points. Moving on to the statistics now. Shannon Elazar leads the reserve grade statistics for goals. He has 5. A three-way tie for second between Football St George's Ruby McLean, Sydney FC's George Tiong, and Newcastle Jets' Patrick Nolan. Third place is tied between Hills United's Lachlan Denham, Western Sydney Wanderers' Jackson Taylor, and Football St George's Jake Vidakovic. On the assist chart, Shannon Elazar has 5 for the Newcastle Jets. Mitch Albert of Football St George has 3 in second, and Patrick Nolan of the Newcastle Jets has 2. Onto the clean sheets now, and Jackson Taylor has 5 for the Western Sydney Wanderers. A tie for second between Football St George's Logan Balterson and Newcastle Jets' Asim Soddy. They're both on 4. And third place is held up by Sydney FC's Cody Town on 3. Onto the Premier League table and statistics now. And the Newcastle Jets, they sit 15 points clear with one game left to play. They sit on 31 points in first. An amazing season from them with one game left to play against Sydney FC. Again, congratulations to them for winning the comp. In second place, it's Hills United. They sit on 16 points. They play Football St George, the winner of those two. They play next week on the last round. So the winner of that match will claim second. So that'll be a really interesting game. Speaking of Football St George, they sit in third. They're on 14 points. Sydney FC, they sit in fourth. They are on 11 points. Each of the teams have all played 11 games. And the Western Sydney Wanderers, playing 12 games, sit dead last. They're on 8 points, locked in. Onto the statistics now. And Chris Hassers of the Newcastle Jets has 10. Jordan Crane, sneaking up after his double, has 8. Also for the Newcastle Jets. And Chris Turnbull of Hills United has 6. On the assist chart, and Ryan Seck has 9 for the Newcastle Jets. Mitch Albert has 6 for Football St George. And Chris Hastis has 5 for the Newcastle Jets. On the clean sheets tally, and Newcastle's Dimitri Liolio-Davis has 9 for the Newcastle Jets. Hills United's Matt Mallows and Sydney FC's Harry Simmons sit in second. They're both on 3. And Football St George's Abdullah Karim sits on 2. And that concludes this episode of the Powered by Football podcast. Almost. I have one more little interview that I want to play before we get into all the boring you can get involved stuff. So, without further ado, let's introduce our surprise interviewee.
Sure, my name's Dimitri Liolio-Davis. I'm 40 years old and I play for the Newcastle Jets.
So now, Dimitri, I know it's, been up on social media and all that sort of stuff, but, you do have an announcement for us. Do you want to kind of, give your little announcement for us?
Yeah, sure. So, I've recently been signed by the Westphal Olympic FC Powerchair football team, and they play down in Melbourne in the Victorian Premier League. I'll be playing for them for their upcoming 2024-25 season.
Yeah, nice. So what sort of motivated you to make that decision?
Firstly, Rebecca Evans from the team, who I played with on the Power Rouge, she approached me just about, under a month ago about the possibility of playing for them in their local season down there in Victoria. I was interested and things just went on from there. My main support worker and who's the coach of the Jets, Cameron, he was overseas on holiday in Japan at that time when Beck was messaging me, so I just had to wait until he came home, which was a few days ago, and I was able to talk to him and make sure that it was okay with him to take me down to Melbourne whenever I'd have to play. And he gave it the all clear, and then after that, it all came together and we made it happen.
Yeah, nice. So you'll be going back and forth to play.
Yeah, flying between Sydney and Melbourne to play for them.
Wow, that'd be pretty hefty. So on that sort of side, what goes into that logistics wise, sorting out all that? Because that'd be pretty big.
Yeah, so obviously flying down and back in a day, probably not ideal, but it is what it is, I guess. I might make a few of the weekends a little extended holiday and stay a night or two in Melbourne and make the most of it. But in the past, Luke David's done it when he played for the Jets a few years ago and would fly in and fly out and play, and it seemed like it was all right for him. So I guess, it's all right for me. So I'll give it a shot.
Can you go all right flying?
Yeah, I'll be fine. When I was talking to Beck, I said that I would have to fly Qantas because taking only one support worker, I have to be lifted on any of the other airlines, and Qantas have the Eagle hoist. So it'll be fine to fly Qantas. And I said it would be a bit more expensive because the other airlines are obviously a bit cheaper, but Beck was like, yeah, that's fine. We can go with Qantas and it'll be all good.
Yeah, nice. So when's the move happening? When do you, start going down to train before the season and all that?
I'm not sure if I'll get to do any training. I was talking with Chris, and at the moment the club doesn't do any individual club training. It's more group training with multiple clubs worth of players down there. So Chris said if they do start training as a club together, they'll see if they can make it around the Sundays, maybe on a Monday or something. So if I stay one night or a couple of nights, I can train. But for now, it'll just strictly be just going down to play and then coming back.
Yeah, nice. So when does that season go for?
Their season starts somewhere, I'm pretty sure, towards the end of October, and then they have a break for Christmas, and then they'll return in the new year, and they finish out around about April, I think.
Yeah, nice. It was a bit difficult to find. Like I was looking it up for researching for this interview. I couldn't find anything. But yeah, it's an exciting venture for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Really looking forward to working with a lot of their young players. Chris and Rebecca have told me that Westvale have some really promising young players, so I'm very excited to work with them. And I've never really played for any other club other than the Jets, seeing we're a foundation club since the whole sport started. I've always had Chris Hastis and James Kim by my side at club level my whole career, so it's going to be really interesting playing with a whole new club, new teammates, and in a totally new environment.
I was really surprised when I saw it because I've been so used to seeing you at the Jets my entire life, really. So I was like, oh, wow. And then just before we wrap this up, is there anything else you want to add about this discussion?
I'd definitely love to thank Rebecca Evans, Chris Casares, Spendable, who's a sponsor that's helping all of this happen, the whole Westvale Olympic FC club for giving me this amazing opportunity, and it definitely would not happen without all of them, so I'm super grateful for that.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for being a return guest on the podcast, D. You're one of very few in that group, so congratulations there.
I feel very privileged for that too.
Oh, yeah. All good. All good. Well, yeah, thank you so much.
No problem.
You can get involved in power chair football here in New South Wales as an athlete, coach, referee, or volunteer by visiting the NSW PFA website linked below. Our season takes place in Glenwood at the Valentine Sports Park from the 24th of February 2024 to the 6th of July 2024 every Saturday. Contact info@nswpfa.org.au for more information. Just a quick note that the views of this podcast are mine and mine alone. The opinions and thoughts expressed do not necessarily reflect those of the NSW PFA. If you want to get in touch with the podcast, you can follow us at Powered by Football Pod on Instagram, join our Facebook group, Powered by Football Podcast, or follow our Twitter account, Powered by Pod. Thanks for listening.